The mission of the Inattentive ADHD Coalition is to ensure that children with inattentive ADHD are diagnosed by the age of 8 and that adults with inattentive ADHD receive prompt and accurate diagnosis when seeking help. To learn more about our mission and how you can help, visit iadhd.org.
I'm Catherine Ellison. I'm a journalist and author of a number of books, including the family ADHD memoir, Buzz, A Year of Paying Attention. Irena, to start off with, can you tell us what you're doing these days?
Yes. And first of all, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to talk to you and to be here. What I'm doing in a nutshell is still trying to recover from recently publishing my new book, which is a memoir about my life in college admissions.
Title of which is?
The Golden Ticket, A Life in College Admissions Essays. And it's written as a series of responses to college prompts, answering real college application essay questions from the perspective of me, who has been able to glean, I hope, at least some wisdom during my 17 years working as an independent college counselor.
The book has been getting a lot of great attention and reviews, and it concerns not only your work as a college counselor in one of the most overheated college markets of the country, but also the fact that you were doing this work while raising 3 kids who are neurodiverse.
Yes, so that's the divide at the heart of the memoir. On the one hand, I was working with students and families whose greatest hope and desire was to get into one of the top 10 or maybe the top 20 colleges at the top of the US News and World Report rankings. And on the other hand, my husband and I were struggling to raise our oldest son, who was diagnosed with autism when he was 2.5, and then subsequently also with ADHD and major depression. Our middle son, who was diagnosed with inattentive ADHD in high school, and who also had some depression, and our youngest daughter, who was also diagnosed with ADHD in high school and had depression and severe anxiety. Of course, on the heels of the 3 of them, I was diagnosed with attentive ADHD last October. So
That's October.
Yeah, really recently. That's not in the book, but certainly the disconnect between the life I was living at home and what I was doing professionally was pretty profound.
So you were diagnosed with inattentive ADHD, weren't you? And I understand you have a story to tell us about how difficult it was to get diagnosed.
Such a story. I suspect that I have had ADHD for most of my life, looking back on it. I think that once I got to college, I created some workarounds that I didn't realize at the time were workarounds. I just thought I was functioning, and that was great. The older I got, particularly in the past 4 or 5 years, and I haven't really looked at research about aging or menopause and ADHD, but I suspect that there's a correlation, at least there was for me, when all of my workarounds stopped working. I asked my husband, who happens to be a psychiatrist, if he thought that perhaps I had ADHD. He looked at me like, duh. What else could you possibly have apart from anxiety, which I think everybody in our family suffers from? I went through the Kaiser diagnostic process I started it last May. I was diagnosed in the middle of October. So the diagnostic process took that long. Everything about it seemed expressly designed to address all the deficits of ADHD and essentially put up a very creatively designed series of roadblocks for people who have a hard time following through, remembering who they talk to, following up with that person, following up with a new person, having to fill out multiple questionnaires with slightly different questions. It was a saga.
So you went through this with an HMO that you're willing to name?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, this was Kaiser. And I will say, to Kaiser's credit, it was just in general their mental health treatment model, which occasioned the massive walkout last fall or last summer, which was in part responsible for the delay in diagnosing anything. The very lovely woman I spoke to for over an hour and a half on Zoom asked me step-by-step questions about what in the process worked, what in the process didn't. With each new step, her eyes got bigger and her jaw dropped further and further. She was like, that did not happen.
What was the worst roadblock that really delayed your diagnosis?
So it was the actual assessment. I contacted psychiatry at Kaiser, which was actually very straightforward. They said, we will do our own assessment and then we will refer you to the ADHD assessment clinic. The ADHD assessment clinic was the place that was just completely off the hook. The referral was easy. Getting somebody to get back in touch with me took forever. There were so many questionnaires. I cannot tell you how many questionnaires there were because I lost track after the first dozen. I finally got an email saying that the lead time to actually get a proper assessment was 8 to 12 weeks.
Why do you think it took so long for you to suspect that you had ADHD?
I think that I started dropping more balls than juggling them. I had always been pretty good about juggling multiple things. I started forgetting appointments or forgetting to write appointments down on my calendar. My time blindness got markedly worse, where I would basically fall prey to this magical thinking that if I needed to be somewhere that took 10 minutes to get to, I would teleport there magically if I left the house 2 minutes before I needed to be there. It was just this acceleration of everything that made my life miserable. I'm not even mentioning the piles of clothes and papers all over the house that just daunted me and I couldn't
This
approach
just
without.
suddenly happened though, because your husband said, duh. Do you think that he'd known for a long
I
time?
think he had known. There was also other stuff that I do a lot, flirting. I personally just find that to be a dynamic
Right.
way to have
Yeah.
a conversation.
I know.
But it turns out some more linear people don't like that. There were a lot of things that he was tuned into and didn't want to, as a psychiatrist, put on that hat and not the hat of my husband, who is charmed by my various eccentricities and quirks. He actually had to also fill out a questionnaire. He was like, oh boy, these questions.
But you're an amazing overachiever, which I've heard about myself and other people too. How
Mhm.
can you possibly have ADHD, right? You got here to the United States when you were like, what, 9 for the Soviet Union?
Mhm.
Not speaking English, you learned English. I'm guessing you were a pretty great student. When you look back now, do you feel that ADHD was making you suffer through school in any way? Do you have memories of that?
I do. I was actually a pretty great student until middle school, and definitely that tailed off in middle school and then also in high school as classes started demanding more sustained step-by-step work. I could care less about, to be grammatically and factually correct, about classes that didn't interest me. I did really well in classes that did. This caused a great deal of chagrin for both my parents, who really wanted me to be an engineer. The classes I couldn't care less about were exactly the classes that one would want to take if one wanted to be an engineer. The hyper focus, I think, that helped me learn English more quickly, that helped me really immerse myself in the humanities and read a lot, really helped me there. Did not help me in math and English, and actually did not help me in classes that I liked but were too long, because a semester system, it was just too long. I would start with the best of intentions, and then after about 8 weeks, I would start doodling in the margins and tuning out, and all my A's would slide down into B's and the occasional C. When I got to UCLA, which was on a quarter system, which is 10 weeks long, all of a sudden it was like, wow, things were happening quickly and there was no chance to procrastinate. I was taking new and interesting classes all the time in an area that I really loved and was good at.
You mentioned anxiety,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering how long you've had that. And if you look back now and think that might have been related to the ADHD.
The anxiety, I think, really was an underlying thing, potentially when I was in high school, though less It really spiked when I got to college. I think just the underlying current of also intergenerational trauma. I'm the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, and people in my family worry a lot about where everybody is and why they're 5 minutes late. Surely that must be because they're dead in a ditch. There was a lot that I internalized, but
So you didn't see it
generally,
related to the ADHD?
I don't think it really did.
Yeah.
The performance anxiety, if I really care about something, if it's a deadline that matters, I will get it done. In some ways, it's a productive mechanism. At least that's the way I view it.
When you look back on yourself as a child, do you remember any dreaminess in class or forgetfulness, anything like that?
I not as a child, apart from getting totally lost in books and losing track of time and being asked to please pay attention. This was also true at home where my mom would be like, I've called you for dinner now 17 times. I know you're in the next room. I know you can hear me. And I was like, no, actually, I can't because I'm very deep into something. As a child, there were some of those signs, but because I was reading voluminously, my parents were reasonably happy about that.
My ADHD thing, or one of the many ones, was that I was a nudge. I wouldn't let go of things and I would pester my parents all the time. I realized that left me with an internal image of myself that wasn't so positive. Do you think you internalized any of that? People's impatience with you?
I don't think it was so much the impatience. I think that there was a compensatory anxiety about wanting to get all of my thoughts out all at once. That led me to title that I am still very proud of, which was being voted most likely to talk to anyone or anything about anyone or anything in high school. I do tend to talk in long paragraphs because there's this pressured urgency of if I don't get the idea out, I'll forget.
You've got a lot of great things to say.
I try.
What kind of treatment did you get from Kaiser and what kind of change has it made in your life?
Eventually, I was diagnosed with inattentive ADHD. I was put on medication, which made a big difference. I've also been working with a therapist who is very helpful about gently suggesting connections between what is going on in my life that should be obvious to me. What are some of the systems I can put in place to make my time more structured?
Okay, I want to ask you more about that, but first, what kind of difference has the medication made? Like, how do you feel differently?
Just feeling more clear-headed and feeling like the many competing voices in my head about all the things that I should be doing and aren't doing and didn't even know where to start. All of a sudden it was like, oh, I'll do this first and then this. And then I was like, who even am I? How am I coming up with all this? Just that clarity of how to triage what needs to be done. Suddenly I would see something that was messy and realize it would only take me like 1 minute to just sort through this and bring some things where they needed to go. It was really noticeable when the medication wore off and you could tell when it was flagging.
I know when I look back at my parenting, that's the only time that I really wish I'd been thoroughly treated in control of my ADHD because it led to a lot of emotional.
Oh, the impulsivity is, I'm really glad you brought that up because I think I was not the best parent. It's not really useful to look back with regret because you can't change anything. But how little patience I had. I was actually good at crisis management because that requires in the moment responses and triaging.
Yeah.
But I wonder how many of those crises I contributed to by being super reactive, super emotional, super impulsive, saying things and an hour later going, oh, that was not well phrased.
The adult. Yeah.
Right. You're so angry. Exactly. I'm the adult in the room. I feel like the amount of patience and acceptance and the realization that I should try to talk to my kids, not so much in paragraphs and convince them of my rightness, but maybe listen more and talk less. That's been huge.
I'm sure they appreciate it. And I want to give a spoiler alert that they're all doing pretty well, right?
They are. A lot of it is them figuring it out. But a lot of it has been me just realizing my place is not to react to every single thing that happens in a really fraught, emotional way.
What a concept, huh?
I know.
Somebody told me along the line, you just have to be calm. And I thought, whoa, what is that?
How do you do that? What are these strange words?
Do you ever wish that you'd been diagnosed as a child? Do you think that would have made some things easier?
I would not trade my pre-diagnosis childhood, because some of the willingness to immerse myself in things that were interesting to me were really helpful. I would not have learned English as quickly as I did had I not single-mindedly immersed myself in American television after school. I was very single-minded about watching them and absorbing everything. Same with reading. Medication wouldn't have changed it, but my parents were new immigrants to the US and had a complicated relationship with the idea of psychiatric medication. They came from a country where that was used as a tool of oppression.
Is that a problem for you when you finally had to consider taking it?
No, once they saw the difference that it made in me and also in the kids, I don't think that they had any compunctions or second thoughts. But I also wish that somebody had addressed, why is this woman struggling so hard to finish her dissertation? Lots of people struggle to finish their dissertation, but the fact that I procrastinated and then finished it in 2.5 months because my funding was running out, that was a classic ADHD thing. My parenting would have been more thoughtful and probably better, for sure better, if that had been addressed earlier. But again,
it is what it is.
Yeah.
You think your teachers early on, were there symptoms that they could have seen, that they could have spotted?
what all of my teachers said to my poor parents who came here from the Soviet Union, in part so that 9-year-old me could have a better life, literally with one voice: Irena has so much potential. We wish that
Always.
she would actually work to it. The underlying implication was she's lazy, and in the better cases, she's disorganized. But in the 1980s, when I was in high school, I don't think that anybody had any clue that there could be a name to this. It could be treated, it could be recognized. It was just, she's obviously very bright, and we don't know why she's getting B minuses, but we feel bad for you, her poor immigrant parents.
But that's the classic thing that people keep saying. When I was a kid, my teachers always said I wasn't working up to my potential, which is a real bad thing to do to a kid's brain, because you can't try any harder sometimes.
Right, because you are trying.
Yeah.
I had a really poignant moment with our middle son, Noah. Everybody was pounding on him, you're not working to your potential. One day just looked at me and said, when you keep saying I'm not working to my potential, it makes me feel like I'm stupid. Where is all this great potential if I have it? Like, why isn't it manifesting? That was the first time that I was like, oh, that's not a compliment. Just
Right.
try harder.
What does it mean to try harder?
That's
too?
exactly it.
Maybe sometimes if we broke that down into, here, let's write everything down that you have to
Mhm.
remember. You mentioned workarounds that were working for you in college. What did you do?
So I did what you did to a much higher level, which is I started writing for the student newspaper, the Daily Bruin. I had found my people, fast talking, creative people who were deadline driven and who loved being there until 11:30 at night, working on stories, and that sheer adrenaline. We need the story and we need it in 45 minutes, sitting there and banging it out. I worked really well with ambient noise. People are coming and going and talking. And I was like, this is my place. I need that so that I could periodically chat with somebody and then go back to my paper and focus more fiercely. I think one of the things that probably undid me is COVID, because I couldn't work in coffee shops anymore. There was not that ambient noise.
What
Yeah.
are your strategies now that you're really conscious that you do have ADHD? Like, what kinds of things help you?
One thing that I just did is I bought the cube timer, but before that, I was setting basically an artificial sense of urgency for myself, where I would set a timer for 15 minutes and pretend I was back in college finishing an exam and there are 15 minutes left to go. I can't claim writer's block. I can't claim distractibility. Like, you have 15 minutes to do this. 9 times out of 10, I will sit and write for more than 15 minutes, but it's that getting started and knowing that a timer is ticking down that's been really helpful.
That's a good one. You've given so much thought to your own children and what the expectations were and how difficult it is in the environment that you're in, Palo Alto.
Mhm.
And then thinking about your own diagnosis, has that changed the way that you talk to parents who come to you and are just so desperate for that Ivy League status?
Absolutely. That started changing even before I fully conceptualized and started putting together the book. I came to this work with the naive assumption that these parents who were hyper focused on the Ivy League or Stanford or MIT were crazy people. I was working with this really challenging family life and these three children, each of whom had a lot of challenges. I'm the good one. I'm sane in all this, and they're nuts. I started realizing as our struggles grew more and more serious that to some extent, my husband and I were crazy parents as well. We were trying to push our children not into the to push them to work to potential without really unpacking what that was, doing it out of love and anxiety for them. But the parents I had easily written off as crazy, I really started understanding that that same sense of misplaced anxiety and love was driving them. For them, the Ivy Leagues were this security blanket. Many of them are immigrant families from India, from China, from other countries who had suffered a lot and struggled a lot to get to this country so that they could give their children a better life. And what embodies a better life more than the Ivies? Coming to that with a sense of compassion and patience rather than trying to disabuse them of that notion as something really destructive, I think was really helpful.
When somebody comes to you with a child who has ADHD, for example, is there a different kind of advice that you'll give them? What do you say?
What I see just is the mismatch between expectations and reality. I have a student who, for example, presents with a lot of the symptoms that I recognized in myself in high school and is getting B's and B minuses and is clearly very smart and capable and often has a super interesting thing that they're into. The parents sometimes don't see the value in that thing, even though it's the thing that makes the kid come alive. It could be designing a board game, it could be sewing, it could be tinkering, it could be a musical instrument. The parents, meanwhile, are trying to get me to square the circle of how could our child with their 3.7 GPA get into the Ivies? And the fact they can't, then we talk about the need to meet their child where they're at and not where the parent wants them to be. We talk about manageable course loads. We talk about working with an executive skills tutor who can help them manage their schoolwork. We talk about working to capacity and not beyond capacity because it does no one any good to be pushed to do something that they just can't.
I also love your thought about recognizing what's positive or what your kid is into too. Then they're in a position of getting more good reactions from people where mostly they're getting all these negative reactions.
Where they can feel good about themselves. Our oldest son was a varsity wrestler for 4 years in high school, and that was huge for him.
You encourage that, yeah. Yeah, we've got to wind down, but is there any important question I haven't asked that you'd like to answer?
No, this was really great.
Really
It was
fun.
wonderful
Yeah.
to talk to you.
I'm looking forward to interviewing you on a future show. Here at the Inattentive ADHD Coalition, we're making a library of videos of interviews with people with inattentive ADHD as they talk about their challenges and their successes. If you would like to be interviewed, please send your contact information to www.iadhd.org/awareness.
This has been a production of Inattentive ADHD Coalition. Check us out at iadhd.org and see how you can help us by donating or by spreading awareness about inattentive ADHD. Thank you.